Hey, I'm Will LaVeist. He's Eric Claville. You're tuning into LaVeist and Claville, where we tell it to you straight the way it is, from a black male's perspective, because it's like that, and that's the way it is. So let's get right to it. This show, we continue in our series on the black tax, and this is a black tax, black business owners, black tax and black businesses. So, it's often said that when white America catches a cold, black America catches the flu. Well, this COVID-19 pandemic, the shutdown of the economy has raised all kind of issues in society about the disparities that exist, and has definitely exacerbated the challenges that black business owners face. So depending on the source, in 2020, there was about 1 million to 2 million black businesses, depends on what source that you use, right? And we pulled some research and found, for example, a study, University of California, Santa Cruz reported that in February 2020, there were about 1 million black-owned businesses nationally, right?
Yeah.
About 6 weeks later, after the pandemic hit, that number dropped to about 440,000 businesses, they say. So a 40% reduction. Many of those businesses shut down for good. Meanwhile, the reduction among white-owned businesses was about 17%. So you got 41% versus 17% according to the study. So overall, nearly 4 million minority-owned businesses whose annual sales are total around $700 billion shut down because of COVID-19. And then also, a survey by H&R Block, let's see what that said, was there was about 3,000 small businesses, 53% of black business operators saw their revenues cut in half because of the pandemic. So, I'm blessed to be employed and have an employer, but I'm also a black business owner, as I've had a consulting firm for several years now, and I can absolutely tell you that my revenue from my firm has dried up very much, because the reason why, even though I'm employed, I've had a business, because multiple revenue streams, as you know, Claville, is key to building wealth in this country and really being able to, in a lot of ways, secure yourself from the ebbs and flows, that whether it's getting fired by your employer, which I've experienced, or what many black business owners are experiencing. So
absolutely,
these are the kind of, major numbers that have hit because of this pandemic. But also, there's still a lot of hope that is still as a result of this. For example, the heightened awareness that has come as a result of what happened, the murder of George Floyd, the awareness of injustices within the United States based on race, as well as throughout the world, has in a lot of ways also drawn attention to black businesses. And so there are business owners that are reporting, hey, that they're getting some better businesses, and more broader consumers are looking at their businesses because of this heightened awareness of the disparity. So
absolutely,
there's pluses and there's minuses, but there's definitely a black tax to being a black business owner.
Absolutely. Well, this is one of the most important black tax series that we're doing. All of them are very important. Mm-hmm. But as it relates to black business and the black tax, this is a very, very important piece, because we're living in the United States of America, where people actually leave their homelands, where they have generations and centuries of their lineage and their name attached to come to America in order to find their wealth, in order to create their
land of opportunity.
Absolutely. The great thing about America is you can own property. You can own and create things, own a business. There are many great stories about it, but we know from our history that African Americans have had the short end of the stick on a lot of opportunities through law and public policy, and also through historical discrimination and systematic or systemic racism and so forth. And this still exists today. Now, when you take a look at opportunities for African Americans, keep in mind, we just looked at 100-year commemoration of the Tulsa Massacre. We've got others coming up, Rosewood, Florida, and many others in between that took place. But there was generational wealth that African Americans had by owning their own businesses that was wiped away.
Absolutely.
Integration was good. It was great. But it was also bad for African American businesses because they did not receive the same support white businesses received in order to continue or expand their operations. So that also cut off the opportunity for generational wealth. And then after the civil rights legislation that was created, then that's when African Americans really had an opportunity to seek out support, financial support through financing, opportunities through education, and the like, under the protection of the law. Now, you still got to put out a great product, and many African Americans and the businesses do that no matter what color or ethnicity.
Absolutely.
That's just a principle of business.
Right.
But we find where African Americans have a harder time and face discrimination more so than others. As a matter of fact, when you take a look, I'm looking at, you mentioned several studies that you took a look at, or articles. I'm looking at a resource from Fundera.com regarding the state of Black-owned businesses, or the statistics of it. And it showed that in 2020, at the end of 2020, 58% of Black business owners said that their business's financial health is, quote, at risk, unquote, or, quote, distress, unquote, during the COVID-19 pandemic. 58%. Will, if Black businesses, a population of people, meaning a group of people, which they are, but there's business, but a group of people, and 58% said that their financial status was at risk or distress, that's
an absolute crisis. I mean, you talking about. Think about all of the chain reaction that comes from that. So, 58% of business owners, how are the folks providing for their families? So you're looking at the possibility of homes going under. So now, not only the business is gone, but the place where you are raising your family, your other asset that you put so much into is now at risk. And a lot of Black businesses, because of, for example, the challenges of getting access to capital, the challenges of being able to get loans, a lot of these entrepreneurs put everything, all of their assets into these businesses. So a lot of them raided their 401ks to start these businesses, or took out second mortgages on their homes. So like you said, if you look at a crisis, man, where half of, 58% is more than half of the businesses, there's a chain reaction that's going to come from it.
Absolutely. Now, it's funny you mentioned that, because the chain reaction, that was a good point, because we don't think about it. We think about the business owner, but we don't think about the impact of that business shutting down, because a lot of businesses are still brick and mortar, right? I know that there are a lot of businesses that operate online and the like, but a lot of our businesses are service industry type businesses, whether it be, again, not so much food service and walk-in or restaurants, but also consulting, CPA firms, tax firms, law firms, insurance firms, and so forth. People want to see you. They want to shake your hand. They want to know who is this person that I'm entrusting, that I'm giving my entrusting with their fiduciary duty with. So when we talk about the impact of Black businesses in financial distress and shutting down, which again, I marvel at that, 58%. Well, let's just say 60. Because some people may have said, hey, we've been through this, we can get out of it. So they really didn't probably answer that question fully. But 60%, 6 out of 10 Black businesses said we are distressed.
Yeah.
That is serious. Now, from another stat under this Fundera.com resource, it showed that Black businesses, by the end of 2020, they employed approximately 920,000 people. So let's just say 1 million people. Right. So, Will, if 6 out of 10 businesses are financially at risk or distressed, which means if you're distressed, that means you're pretty much on your last option, your string, your financing. You're waiting for something to come through to dig you out.
Right.
That means that now it's possible that 600,000, and let's just say half of that number, 300,000 people are out of a job.
Right.
And if the average business employs, according to this study, 6 to 10 employees, right, or less, then that means that out of, let's just say 10 employees, right? If they employ 10 employees, that means that now you have at least 30,000 buildings that are closing. So now your real estate market becomes increased because of this glut of property that's on it. So this street or strip that used to have all these businesses,
Right.
but they take down the marquee, right? So you see all these spaces, dilapidation, abandonment. And when you see a dilapidation and abandonment, then you see elements that come into the community that you probably don't want in the community.
Now here you go, crime. So now you start looking at crime, right? You said what the elements like you talked about. So you look at the underground economy, drugs, other ways of people trying to survive and trying to care for themselves start coming into play. So you got crime, now you got dilapidation, you got crime, you got people who have means looking at, I can't continue to stay in this environment and watch my asset depreciate in its value. So I'm going to move out. So now you get some of those foundational people in the community that help to keep a community strong, looking for other alternatives because they're concerned about their family, the well-being of their children. Then it starts affecting schools. Again, how are schools financed? The schools are financed based on tax revenue from housing, from businesses, so forth, in the community. So it just leads to this chain reaction that, again, disadvantages the communities where a lot of us find ourselves. And then on top of that, the victim begins to get blamed for the condition in which we find ourselves. So this is where the need for a government, which is the only other asset or resource out there other than the banking economy that can put a major influx of money to try to restore or reverse this trend. Then we find out, right, that so this is where the PPP money and all of these other funds come in, the stimulus, just try to stir the downward trend. But then we start hearing about how Black businesses weren't getting a lot of these funds at the level that they should have been getting these funds. So why was that? Well, a lot of the PPP money was tied to having to have a relationship with a bank.
Right.
So now if you didn't have a relationship with a bank because of difficulties, because banks claiming that you are a bad investment, then you found ways of getting money in other methods that did not necessarily put you in a relationship with a bank. Now the government is using this program to get access to people supposedly who need the money, but you need to have a relationship with a bank. So you can see how the system and how things are interconnected, again, create a situation where Black and brown businesses become, disadvantaged, and then it can just snowball and snowball.
Yeah, and it's funny, you mentioned financing and you mentioned funding and relationship with banks. I'm looking at the study as well from Fundera, where it talks about how Black businesses actually get their money. And a lot of times individuals end up funding their own businesses out of their own cash flow.
Right.
Now, that's not the way that you become wealthy. Now, of course, sometimes to get started, you have one product and so forth. But I think Shark Tank has showed us, the show that comes on, that you don't use your own money to expand. You use somebody else's money.
Right.
So a lot of Black businesses actually utilize their own cash flow. As a matter of fact, 44% of Black business owners use their own cash flow to start their own venture. So that area of capital ventureless COVID has brought out how it has its problems with being a closed group, meaning that African Americans and women have a hard time accessing that group. So therefore, there's a lot of great ideas out there. I have a lot of people that come to me with great ideas, but they don't know where to go. They don't have access to money, or they can't get through the door. And when we talk about relationship with banks, matter of fact, it says that 38%, 37.9% of Black business owners say they are discouraged from applying for loans. and they receive less business financing less often at higher rates.
Right.
So you have three strikes against you. Start out the gate. Number one, you can't get a loan because you're discouraged from applying for one. If you do get a loan, the rate is so astronomically high that there's no margin for error. And third, if you can't access financing, don't have a relationship with a bank, or can't get to a venture capitalist, you got to fund it yourself, which now leaves the margin for error very small. So, so basically, your tax. I mean, we both had to take a collective just sigh because we both know it. Look, we both know it very well. That it's hard to get that startup and the margin of error. And let's just say we're fortunate enough to get a good contract, or we're fortunate enough to get a good case settlement. You got to manage that. I mean,
absolutely.
It's time for celebration, but the celebration stops within 24 hours because now you have to have a plan before that check clears to expand, to market, to advertise, and to put 6 to 9 months, if not even 12 months of expenses up before you can even move forward anything else.
Right. And I think that is, when we talk about black tax, in so many ways, you hit the nail right on the head about this issue of margin of error.
Yeah.
It's like you're constantly keeping the lights on. You're constantly on a hustle. You're constantly, and let's be honest, I mean, being in business already is stressful.
Yeah, you're taking a risk.
It already is taking a risk. But when you're in a situation where like you said, your margins for error are so slim, it just adds an additional level of stress onto you that, again, can actually even affect your decision making. When you're looking at it, it's like you don't get the ability to be able to breathe and do research and development.
Absolutely.
To be able to forecast down the road and see where trends are going and where you may want to be. If you're so focused on the here and now all of the time and just going from one moment to the next moment to the next. And these are the kinds of pressures that, again, just being a small business owner, or being a business owner, even if you're running a large corporation, there are challenges to staying competitive, staying on top of the market. But when that margin of error is so slim, it prevents you from doing these other things that are also important to keeping your business solvent, to keeping your business relevant, to being able to, to really grow your business. You need time to be able to breathe. You need time to be able to think. You need time to be able to plan. And these are the kinds of challenges that oftentimes are heaped upon Black business owners, Black and brown business owners, that are challenges that others are just not facing to the same degree, and, it's something about that entrepreneurial spirit that you got to be able to keep your mind focused on. Yes, tomorrow's going to be a better day. Yes, I can make this move and I can make this gamble and still succeed. Or you got to be able to still be able to learn from your mistakes and come back and keep going. But when that margin of error is so slim, it just makes it really difficult to be able to do that kind of intellectual, that kind of thinking. That's also critical to really building your business.
And then, Will, you also have to get past perception, right? Mm-hmm. One thing that the Black Lives Matter movement and social justice movement of 2020 showed us is that, discrimination and inequities and inequalities go beyond social issues. It was also economic. Black businesses, Black business owners, Black businesses are discriminated against and disadvantaged in many ways that are seen and unseen than their white counterparts. As a matter of fact, we could talk about the red line effect, where you may have a great business, but you were forced to operate only. Now, again, I say only in a marginalized or a Black community or poor community. Now, of course, you want to have a presence there because major businesses have a presence there. You may go into a depressed community, but there's a Walgreens there. You may go into a depressed community, but there's a chain grocery store there. You may go to a depressed community, but there is a chain fast food restaurant there or a chain gas station, and the list goes on and on. So it's not that you don't want to operate there, but you want to be able to expand outside of those margins. Right. Well, you've got pressure and discouragement and outright discrimination by realtors. They won't show you property in the area, or they won't lease to you. Right. I've had colleagues that have faced discrimination in that realm. As a matter of fact, one of the starters of the great Black magazines in Chicago talked about how he dressed up as the janitor.
You talk about Mr. Johnson, John Johnson.
Absolutely.
Met him. I remember meeting him in the elevator in the building, in the Ebony building, which is no longer owned by the family. And and I did a stint at Ebony. And you're absolutely right. He had to have a front man. He got a white guy to actually do the deal, close the deal to get that building.
Yeah, because if they knew it was him,
it wasn't going to happen. Yeah.
No deal was coming to the table. So he dressed up as a janitor, and his white colleague said, "Oh, I'm bringing the janitorial service and make sure they can clean it." Yeah. So he gave him an opportunity to look in every room and do certain things. Also, now again, that's perception. But that's perception from the realtor standpoint. But then you have discrimination from the lender standpoint. Well, I'll give a personal story. I remember I was seeking funding to purchase a piece of property, and I had an over 700 credit score. All right. Mm-hmm. I submitted tax records where I was questioned about how did I get my business, this money, where did this come from? I was like, what do you mean it came from? It outlines itself. But I was denied from that particular lender.
Really?
Of course, we had other lenders there, but I remember that particular lender denied me the opportunity to get finance to purchase that piece of property. But, again, we were able to get it. The other lenders were more than willing to lend us the money. But I just remember that. I remember that. And I remember the white lender and how he started to handle me in the very beginning, but I believe when he found out my ethnicity, he started handling me a little differently from there.
Yeah, this suspicion, this additional questioning hurdle that you had to cross. And,
right.
But the thing is, because we don't want to all paint a total doom and gloom, because you said something earlier that was key about the impact of integration and how that had some negative impacts on business. One of the things, as I said at the top, that has also happened is as a result of what is going on with the murder of George Floyd and this heightened awareness, Black Lives Matter movement, is globally, is that there has been this understanding that discrimination, systemic racism is real. And so we're showing some instances, like, for example, the website Yelp reports that actually there's been an increase in searches for Black businesses. It said increase for searches of Black businesses on Yelp from February 2020 to February 2021 actually jumped almost 4%. So that's showing that there's this interest. Okay, let me find ways to support Black businesses. And there are a lot of businesses that actually Black-owned businesses that produce, as you said, quality products that are of interest to people outside of the Black community. And that's one of the things that me personally, that I've seen that as a result of desegregation, right? We don't want to go back to segregation. No. Segregation, when you really look at some of the numbers that existed in terms of wealth for these communities, the Black communities in many ways were still very poor compared to their white counterparts. Absolutely. But what was happening is that because of segregation, the economy, the money in the Black community circulated many more times, which is what the great thing was. But there was these limits to what Black people were able to do outside of their communities. So as desegregation has given us broader access to the wider market, the international market, I think that what's critical is to make that transition of producing products, producing services that are of interest, not just to Black community, but to broader communities. And we see instances of that. We see other groups doing that in our communities. For example, you go into a Black community, you see Chinese food restaurants all over the place. So there's a group that's coming outside of the community that's producing a product from its own culture that people in the Black community have an interest in, right? You see, for example, hair care products, right? A lot of these stores not owned and run by people from the Black community, people outside the community, but they're products that have an interest for Black people, have an interest for a group outside of their own main community. I look at, for example, I think of a key example of that is hip hop music and culture. How here's something that's out of the Black community, out of the Black experience, but is marketed and has interest and is financed and supported, let's be honest, very much so by people who are outside of the community. So I think taking that concept, that idea of producing products that have a broader interest, that you can market to a broader community is a way to go. I look at, for example, Facebook. Facebook, not Black owned by any means, but they have a product that's very much used by Black people, by people of all kinds of different shapes and backgrounds. So I think one of the things that we could be looking at as entrepreneurs, as Black business people, is how do you create products that it may be rooted in our culture, and that's great, that's fine, but that also has an interest that can find a consumer base outside of your immediate community, because we have access to the broader international market, in the national market, that we've never had at any other time in the history of the country.
Absolutely. And Will, you hit the nail on the head. It goes back to operating outside of the red line community, traditional red line community.
Right.
When it comes to, listen, I've said it on many of our shows. I say it during lectures and so forth. I believe that there's nothing more American than being African-American. Mm-hmm. I believe that so much of African-American culture, popular culture, food, dance, music, the way we dress, the way we talk, the way we carry ourselves is American culture with an acceptable face, right?
Right.
So with that being the case, just marketing and creating a product of our culture outside of our community. And I'm not just speaking outside of our communities within America. I believe that African-American culture can be reproduced and packaged in a product that is retail through food, music, and the like, and other products in other countries.
Right.
When we talk about hip hop, there is no other form of music that every country has adopted. Hip hop. I was listening to a documentary where they were highlighting hip hop groups in Morocco, in Iran, in Iceland. Of course, we know about the movement in Asia and the like. Hip hop groups. I was looking at a documentary, Will, where they were going through South Africa, and it was actually a story about the time of Nelson Mandela and so forth.
That's right.
And they went through a shanty town, and I saw the words Tupac and Biggie, and I said, "Wait a minute, did I just
right.
Tupac and Biggie?" And
that's right. I've told the story. I've told the story to you. I think I've told it here about being in Mongolia. I was in Mongolia, walking down the street in the city of Ulaanbaatar in Mongolia, and I heard hip hop, heard Biggie. Guys jumped out the car and was like, Biggie, and wanted to take a picture with me. And here I'm a guy from Brooklyn, in all places, Mongolia, right. And where Biggie is from, and they're taking a picture from. So you're absolutely right. That's absolutely what I'm talking about. Something that's out of our culture, but has interest in a market, across the world and outside of the culture. And the key is us owning it. It's not just turning it over to someone else to go and market and own, but us owning it and being able to market it and being able to generate the wealth from it.
And I think that's the next step, ownership, documenting. There are so many stories of African-American ingenuity, innovation, that was taken during the time of slavery, Jim Crow, and not allowed to be marketed and utilized for generational wealth. Think about all the inventions during the time of the agricultural movement, during the time of the cotton gin and others that we could have marketed. And many stories that we hear of African Americans creating recipes. I think Jack Daniels, the family finally gave, or the company finally gave credit to the African American male that actually, quote unquote, helped to create this process. There's also, big, was Uncle Nearest, there's also discussion regarding, the inventor of the creator of the spice of Popeye's chicken. And that was a big litigation in the like. So there's many of those stories, Will, but I also think about education-wise. George Washington Carver. Before him, there was no peanut butter. If he would have just patented one, and I think it was like over 200 applications for the peanut that he created in his lab. If he would just patented one, where would Tuskegee be? Just one. Just one, Will. Right? So again, like you said, there's not all doom and gloom, but we see opportunity. But we got to look at what's real. We got to look at the facts. We got to look at the history and move toward what's better. But again, this is, like I said, this was a very important discussion, probably one of the most important when we talk about the Black Tax series. We're going to continue our discussion on the Black Tax here on LaVeist and Claville. Those of you that are watching us, thank you so much for tuning into this segment where we talk about Black Tax in business. Continue to like us, follow us, and share on our social media on Facebook, and let us know how we're doing. And if you have any questions, send those as well. Until next time, that's the way we see it. That's the way it is. Be well.